In April 1979, a strange epidemic began in Soviet Sverdlovsk, claiming many dozens of lives. Official reports were simple. Allegedly contaminated meat had entered the city, and authorities urged residents to be careful. But why then did people who hadn't eaten any meat fall ill? Why did the disease spread only in certain areas? And why were the symptoms so unusual and deadly? Rumors multiplied, while answers never came. Doctors were baffled, and the city lived in an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. All this was happening right next to one of the country's most classified military laboratories, where biological weapons were supposedly being developed. What did the laboratory have to do with it? Was it a coincidence or something more? Today we'll examine what really happened in Sverdlovsk in spring 1979, and why this story still causes controversy and concern to this day. A quick word about our sponsor, Magellan TV. I love discovering stories from the other side of the world, and Magellan TV brings these stories to life. Consider Uncle Jack, Manhattan Project and Beyond. This documentary focuses on the real people and experiences behind the atomic bomb project. That's the kind of perspective I really value in documentaries and practice on our channel, and Magellan TV is full of films like this made by experienced filmmakers. Click the link in the description to start watching Uncle Jack, Manhattan Project and Beyond, and get your first month of Magellan TV for just 99 cents. That's full access to over 4,000 documentaries on any device, anytime. It all began with alarming symptoms among residents of southern Sverdlovsk districts on April 2nd. People suddenly fell ill. High fever up to 40 degrees, coughing, vomiting, weakness, loss of consciousness. Strangely, the disease spread especially quickly among workers at one ceramic factory. Doctors were perplexed. What appeared to be ordinary pneumonia almost instantly progressed to pulmonary edema, resisting treatment even with the strongest antibiotics. People died within hours, even on ventilators. Doctors considered one diagnosis after another, but nothing fit. The answer came only a week later, on April 10th, when an elderly man with unusual symptoms died in the hospital. Doctors were puzzled. Brain hemorrhages didn't match any familiar diagnosis. After consultation, pathologists concluded it was anthrax. Officially, the diagnosis was listed as anthrax, cutaneous form. But the symptoms increasingly resembled a rare and far more dangerous form, pulmonary anthrax. Unlike cutaneous and intestinal forms, pulmonary anthrax rarely occurs naturally and is almost always associated with airborne spores, not through food or animal contact. Recalling a similar case the day before, doctors realized this disease explained the wave of deaths and severe pneumonia cases in the city. Rumors spread quickly through the city. People didn't understand what was happening, but saw hospitals overflowing and mortality rising. Official statements were vague. Allegedly, cases of livestock disease had increased, and the administration asked people not to buy meat at markets. But this didn't explain why people who hadn't eaten any meat were getting sick and dying simply because they lived or worked in certain areas of the city. I certainly remember that spring for my entire life. I was already a teenager then, so I remember everything very well. Rumors and gossip appeared immediately. Grandmothers on benches, parents in kitchens at night talked about some kind of sabotage in Sverdlovsk. Very many sick people, allegedly thousands dead, that it all came from meat and that you shouldn't consume it, or dairy products. And on one of those evenings, someone knocked on our door very late. We saw our uncle at the doorstep. He was then one of the leaders of a major sovkhoz. I want to mention that we lived in a two-room Khrushchev-era apartment where everything could be heard and accessed. And then I heard, as my father and uncle sat down to drink a little after dinner, and my father, of course, first began asking what was happening, to which my uncle told him this. The main takeaway from that meeting was the announcement of a quarantine. Livestock disease, anthrax, that measures would be taken, and veterinarians would be involved to select and check all livestock. Essentially, all areas near Sverdlovsk and Chelyabinsk were declared anthrax quarantine zones for livestock. As for the cause of livestock disease and possible human illness, an investigation was currently underway, with an investigative team coming from Moscow. And therefore, all investigation results would be reported separately. At that moment, they weren't planning to explain anything. They only said that there were indeed cases of human illness. It was too early to talk about it now. Then he said that in a week there would be another meeting summarizing all these measures. And because he would come again in a week, he was taking me with him. When the epidemic began in Sverdlovsk, authorities immediately launched an information campaign. Newspapers and television repeated, "Cases of livestock disease have increased in Sverdlovsk and the region. Low-quality feed for cows was delivered to the collective farm. The city administration strongly urges all Sverdlovsk residents to refrain from purchasing meat in random places, including markets." Posters appeared on walls showing a cow with the inscription "Anthrax." The official version, the outbreak was caused by contaminated meat from troubled farms. Data was published about dozens of sick animals along the Sverdlovsk-Chelyabinsk highway. Authorities responded on a massive scale. High-ranking military and medical specialists urgently arrived from Moscow. Entire hospital wings were allocated for patients, and mass vaccination began. According to various sources, up to 80% of Chkalovsky district's population was vaccinated. People without vaccination certificates weren't allowed to work. To combat the infection, total disinfection was carried out. Streets, houses, entrances, roofs, and even asphalt were treated with chlorine-containing solutions. Strong disinfectants were used in apartments and institutions to destroy spores. Veterinary services confiscated and destroyed meat, massively slaughtered and burned livestock to prevent further disease spread. Checkpoints were established at district borders to control food imports and exports. Something immediately caught my eye. The road suddenly turned white. It was covered with some kind of white powder. I should mention that we traveled this road frequently, and there had never been a barrier before, but now there stood a massive checkpoint. Many people were gathered around it. What really stuck in my memory were the enormous trucks, even larger than my uncle's vehicle. They had two massive tanks mounted on them, similar to fuel tankers. But most striking, the image I've remembered all my life, were the people standing by the barrier. They appeared to me then as incredibly tall, imposing figures. They wore black rubber raincoats with large black rubber gloves. They approached the truck and began completely spraying the entire vehicle. They processed the entire truck with this sprayer. It was very frightening. Many years later, when I saw apocalyptic movies for the first time in my life, this exact moment would resurface in my memory, because the impression was probably the same. The deceased were buried in special coffins with chlorinated lime, and the cemeteries where they were buried were carefully isolated. According to official data, 64 people died during the epidemic, but independent estimates cite figures several times higher. But behind this version lay another reality. Doctors and survivors recall being forced to sign non-disclosure documents. The fact is that the city housed a secret facility, Sverdlovsk 19, where biological weapons were being developed. It was here that dangerous powder was produced from anthrax spores. It all began with a technical error. On March 30th, a laboratory employee removed a clogged ventilation filter but didn't report it as required. The evening shift turned on the exhaust, and a cloud of spores was released into the city. The laboratory management didn't warn either city authorities or the Ministry of Defense. In any case, by the time the leak was discovered, it was already too late. The development of biological weapons was prohibited by international treaties, and the USSR categorically denied any connection between the epidemic and the military laboratory. However, few in the West believed this. Publications about a possible biological weapons leak appeared almost immediately. Only years later, after the collapse of the USSR, did the truth begin to emerge. In 1992, Boris Yeltsin, who was the first secretary of the Sverdlovsk Regional Committee during the epidemic, admitted military developments were the cause of the outbreak. He revealed that after the epidemic, the KGB ordered these production facilities to be eliminated. But in reality, the laboratories were simply relocated to another region. Soon, an article was published in Science magazine where scientists analyzed the workplaces and residences of victims. It turned out that most of the infected were in a narrow strip coinciding with the wind direction from the Sverdlovsk 19 laboratory on the day of the release. This became independent confirmation of the connection between the leak and the epidemic. We arrived at my uncle's home. My uncle's wife worked as the head milkmaid at the farm where they raised cattle. I remember when we all sat at the table in the evening, having dinner, she sat there crying. She was lamenting about how some people had come and started sending perfectly healthy, normal cows to slaughter. And she also said that calving season was happening now, and calves were being born. The animals were just as they had always been. So how could they force them to pour out milk? Some strangers had arrived, walking around, inspecting, and they had dug a huge animal burial pit behind the farm where they were taking all the livestock and burning them. We not only knew they were burning livestock, we saw it ourselves because village children were unsupervised and we lived quite close to the farm. And of course, my brother and I saw this huge cloud of black smoke that appeared. And although the area was fenced off, we still saw how they were setting something on fire, dousing it. And again, there were people standing there wearing those same gas masks. Of course, this whole scene, the white farms, these white cattle farm buildings, and right there this huge billowing smoke and that smell, it was certainly terrifying. And as our aunt sat crying, we sat in silence because we understood what she was talking about. And then my uncle sharply told her, "It's none of your business, just do what you're told." And she said, "But how? What should I do?" I want to emphasize that in Soviet times, Soviet people, when it came to food, milk, meat, bread, especially for rural residents, they would never in their lives pour something out, throw something away, or burn something. It was, I don't know, akin to something like a truly terrible loss. And when she said, "So what now? We can't drink this milk, we can't eat this meat?" My uncle turned to her calmly and said, "Yes, you can drink all of it. Yes, you can eat all of it." Of course, when I remember all this now, I understand why people thought it was sabotage, specifically Western sabotage, American sabotage, as they said then, because indeed, in Soviet times, all agriculture, especially regarding large state farms, always had their own serious veterinary service. They were truly closed facilities. And many, of course, didn't understand why livestock was blamed for what happened in Sverdlovsk. Based on what I saw, a great deal of livestock was destroyed. The damage to the state farm was significant, I think, but my uncle remained calm and didn't discuss this topic. When we returned to the city, all these rumors had died down, and no one talked about it anymore. Generally, over time, I had the feeling that all rumors, all gossip that appeared in our Soviet Union, especially regarding topics like our current one, were somehow controlled by the authorities. Nothing simply appeared out of nowhere, and nothing simply disappeared. So I now understand that this rumor about livestock disease, anthrax, was most likely indeed managed. The anthrax epidemic in Sverdlovsk became one of the most frightening and mysterious tragedies of the Soviet era. It showed how dangerous biological weapons experiments can be, and how easily human error can lead to catastrophe. During the Cold War, when both sides sought new ways to impact each other, such a leak could have threatened not just one city, but the entire world. Hundreds of people suffered, dozens died, and the truth about what happened was revealed in fragments over many years. Today, the former military compound number 19 has been transformed into a civilian scientific center, but questions remain. Was this the only leak? How many similar laboratories existed and still exist? This story is a reminder of how dangerous secrecy can be when people's lives and health are at stake, and how important it is to prevent similar tragedies in the future. That's what the spring of 1979 was like, something I've remembered my entire life. What do you think about this? Let me know in the comments. This is really important to us. We read every comment. Your opinion matters to other viewers watching this video too. Share your thoughts. This is Julie from the Soviet-Born channel.
И до новых встреч!